Hello, I'm Prue Bentley, a board member here at the BMI, and I'd like to welcome all of you here to the beautiful Minerva space here at the Ballaarat Mechanics Institute. It's our very first in-person COVID-safe event since I think March, so it's really extraordinary that you've been able to come along to this event in person to see one of our Twilight talks. This is a bit of an experiment. We're streaming this online, so also welcome to those who are watching this online as well. Firstly, I'd like to begin by acknowledging and paying my respects to the Wadawurrung people, the traditional custodians of the land on which we're gathered today. And I'd also like to extend that respect to those on which our virtual audiences are beaming in right across the region. I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, and acknowledge all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders here today, also paying my respects to your elders, past, present and emerging. Now, one of the things that we love about our Twilight talks here at the BMI is highlighting the interesting and creative work that Ballarat locals are doing amongst us. Marion Snowden is a great example of this. Marion's a retired teacher who has the luxury of time now to take her son's dog for regular walks around town. One of her favourite places to walk is along the extensive paths at the old cemetery in Ballaarat, which provide a peaceful, photogenic and fascinating setting. Marion says that while the headstones and memorials can't speak, the stonemason often leaves enough of a clue to make her curious, and that leads to many hours of absorbing Googling. Who among us haven't done that? Tonight, she would like you to come behind the beautiful gates of the old Ballaarat cemetery, along the paths she walks so often, and share in some of the stories that she's gathered there. So please welcome Marion Snowden.
Thank you, Prue, for that welcome, and thank you to those sitting in front of me and anyone who may be watching from home. This is a follow-on talk to one I did 13 months ago. I think it was the 18th of October last year. And this feels a little odd compared to what we experienced together that night. Who'd have thought what would happen to our city, our community, our state, country, world. But here we are, we're fighting back, and things will be different for a while, but gradually, hopefully we'll get a larger audience here, and we will have learnt a lot, hopefully. As Prue said, I'm a frequent walker at the old cemetery. Let's hope this works. This is my walking companion. Some of you saw him and met him last year. This is Lockie, the Westie. He's on the bench at the moment. We got word last week he had an injury and it looked as though he had ruptured an ACL. I think he's going to be all right, but I didn't know dogs did such things. My stories find me. I'm a great believer that something pops out at me from a headstone. It might be a surname, it might be a word. There's lots of things that draw my eye. So I don't go there looking for stories, and neither do I try and tell the stories that are already well told around Ballarat, either in the pamphlets or the history books or so on. Many people you will not have heard of, and that's why I want to tell you their stories. And just as I follow different paths at the cemetery each time, the follow-up research that I do takes me down some very interesting paths. I'm not a historian, a researcher as such. I'm just curious about the things that I see. I acknowledge and appreciate all the research that's been done, the things that we can access with a keyboard and a mouse. And I'm happy to be corrected if I misspeak, which seems to be a word of the year, or if I misinterpret. Information is much easier to find on men for the era that most of these stories are from. I really would have liked to have talked about more women, but this is the way it's come about, so male stories dominate again this year. Naturally, when I speak about a person that's no longer alive, there is inherent sadness. But I know that we've had tricky, difficult times this year, and I'm not going to go to some of the tragedies that I talked about last year, which really painted a story of Ballarat in the early days, those mining accidents and drownings and fires and those things. They did happen, but hopefully it'll be just a little lighter. Several people that I speak about tonight could be a Twilight talk on their own. So I can't tell the whole story, but hopefully you'll enjoy some snippets. So we walk up to the gates. We're going to go through the gates together, ready to go down the path. But instead of going right through, we're going to turn around behind us. And at the back of the gate, we see the name Stamp and Son. These were the people who made the gates. A report in the Courier in May 1870 waxes lyric about these impressive recently installed gates created by Messrs John Stamp and Son at their Pleasant Street foundry. And they described it as the finest iron gateway that can anywhere be found in Victoria. Describing the entrance, they say, in design, it is as rich as it is chaste, and in the happiest manner combines lightness with strength, adding that the actual weight is 35 hundredweight. The following description includes rings, roses, lozenges, urns and drapery, and their summary is, the entire work is finished with the nicest care. Information on John Stamp and his family and his business is quite scant, surprisingly. The same article speaks about a very pretty fountain that's just a little way further down the path, and that was also turned out by Stamp's foundry. It describes a pretty water nymph and a sort of antique, inexhaustible bottle held gracefully. The man who designed this fountain is Joseph Atwood Doane, and he appears to be a very prominent citizen, particularly at the Lydiard Street Wesleyan Sabbath School. He served as mayor of Ballarat, and he was the architect of the majority of Wesleyan churches here in Ballarat, including the site of my Sunday school lessons at Neil Street, and also the Scotchman's Lead Miners' Chapel, which is owned by Julie and Doug Bradbury, and I think many of you know that couple. He had a strong non-professional devotion to music with young people, and I read that on one occasion in 1864, he provided a band of some 70 or 80 juveniles upon the platform, and I'm thinking it may have been a platform in this very room. And it was a fundraising concert for the Ballarat Mechanics Institute. The Ballarat Star described a bill of fare that was long but by no means tiresome. The one note of criticism was a young tenor voice that was in need of toning down very often. Neither of those men are buried in our cemetery. I believe both passed away in Melbourne. We continue down the path and we can walk through or past this beautiful rotunda, which was built for mourners to gather prior to burials. Wouldn't it be wonderful to be able to click our fingers and look back and see that site? You can stand inside this rotunda and gaze down Centre Avenue, and I know you can see a memorial there that I wish to talk about. It was erected by colleagues and friends of the deceased. The square photo there is taken from the back of this memorial. This memorial is for Edward James, and the word architect got me curious. He was a Welsh immigrant and he was settled in Ballarat by 1858, and he made his mark over the following 3 decades as a fine architect. firstly on his own, and later he went into partnership with William Piper. Sadly, much of this work has disappeared from our site, Leicester's Hotel and the Rowlands aerated water factory among them. Edward served as a term as the president of this institution, the Mechanics, and he also designed the iconic London Chartered Bank, which we all know was just up the hill from here. And that was on a corner that was once among the world's busiest financial hubs. We can still admire some of his work. Close by in Camp Street, we can see the Trades Hall, which is there next to the Chartered Bank. We can also see around town the Manchester Unity Hall, and at Creswick and Ballaarat we can see Masonic halls. But he's also the man who designed the beautiful rotunda at the cemetery. But it's a fine residence at 130 Victoria Street that fascinates me. Like me, you might have ridden your bicycle or travelled by tram past the building during your school days. This beautiful building was designed by James and Piper as a family residence for a successful produce merchant, Joseph Phillips, and this building still stands. It's been home to students of many educational organisations since the mid-90s, including Teachers College. Come down the path with me and meet the oldest daughter, Ella, the girl for whom the home was named. Trove allows us to peek into her life. We have to use our imagination, unfortunately, because despite my searching, I could find no photos of this family. An article in 1887 describes a very large procession to the Victoria Street site where the house was to be built, and the occasion was the laying of the cornerstone or the foundation stone, and this was to be done by young Ella herself. Many items were placed into the cavity, something like a time capsule, and after much ceremony, many speeches and prayers, the stone was lowered. Miss Phillips, in Masonic style, gave 3 magic knocks and declared that the stone was well and truly laid. A large banquet followed, and there were about 100 children regaled at that banquet. We can follow her path through school years, first at the Ballaarat Hebrew School, where at the prize-giving function one year, her banjo solo was so popular she was asked for an encore. She went to the Convent of Sacred Heart, and in sub-matriculation she gained first prize in German, second in French, and it was revealed that she had achieved first prize for her fancy work at the agricultural show. Then comes the announcement of her engagement to Julius Solomon on New Year's Day in 1904, a description of the kitchen tea, and then the report of their wedding at the synagogue in 1905. And what an occasion it was. Voluminous descriptions of the outfits of the bridal party, including the little train bearers, the wedding breakfast at the town hall with toasts from very prominent guests, and the ball at St Patrick's Hall. The presents, which were described as very handsome, were listed, including a handsome cheque from Father Joseph and a piano from Mother Susan. Joseph was wealthy, but he was also very community-minded and charitable, being involved in the old colonists, the hospital, the orphanage and the benevolent asylum. The couple lost a 10-year-old son while they were living at Ellaville, and 30 boys from the orphan asylum preceded Abraham's hearse into the cemetery. By 1925, the home was ready for new owners, as Joseph and then Sarah had passed away. And from their plot, on the left-hand side, you can see the rotunda, which has the connection to the man who designed their home. 130 Victoria Street was then purchased by Walter Davis, who was the owner of the iconic fashion store in Bridge Street. Now that is another path we could easily follow, but not today. Ella and Julius eventually settled in Geelong, where he established Solomon's fine department store with its distinctive domes. I imagine no Ella, a Geelong girl, can remember Solomon's department store. He served on the council, and as mayor, he suggested that their slogan should be courage and vision. Like his father-in-law, he was philanthropic, leaving portions of his sizable estate to several orphanages, the hospital, and some Hebrew congregations. The next person to speak about is a man by the name of William Philip Whitcomb. And I'm not sure what caught my eye, but I think it was the word medical friends. And this headstone is amongst stones and dry vegetation. My initial search sent me to the newspapers and an obituary to this well-regarded doctor with the headline, "The Close of a Useful Career." It names him as Ballarat's oldest medical practitioner and detailed his final journey from his Sturt Street home to St Peter's Church, the coffin being carried by members of the City and Ballarat fire brigades, and thus to the old cemetery where 12 uniformed members marched ahead of the hearse. The bells at both fire stations were tolling throughout this occasion. Dr. Whitcomb was heavily involved in the community. He was one of the founders of the Ballarat Rowing Club, and he was also described as a leading spirit in the Ballarat District Fish Acclimatation Society. But the story that resonated with me was from the Herald on July the 22nd, 1884. It's a little bit furry, but the headline reads, "What Dr. Whitcomb Says," with a subheading, "The Expense of Vaccinations Saved in Paris in the Cost of Coffins." Apparently a Herald Sun staff member was visiting Ballarat on another matter, and he took the opportunity to interview Dr. Whitcomb regarding the extensive eruptive outbreak of smallpox in Melbourne, and to ask him about the merits and demerits of vaccination. Quite topical, really. While biding his time in the waiting room, the visitor admired some spirited engravings from the recent Egyptian campaign, as well as the hoofs of the doctor's deceased horse Tommy, who was 34 years old at the time of his death. Quite interesting decoration for a doctor's waiting room. Dr. Whitcomb is in the cart, he's the one in the hat, and I'm guessing that's poor Tommy there. The interview makes interesting reading, but in short, Dr. Whitcomb was strongly in favour of vaccination, and he ended the interview with a partly humorous quote, which was there, "If Melbourne folks are afraid of smallpox or chickenpox, let them come up to Ballarat until the scare subsides. They will be healthy enough when they go back, I warrant, to resist the inroads of any disease." William's wife Annie outlived him by 28 years, and sadly, there is no mention of her. A large plot, a very small headstone, which I think was put there by his colleagues, and no mention of Annie. I know why I was attracted to this more contemporary headstone, because it has the 22nd Battalion on it. And my great-uncle and my paternal grandfather served in the First World War with the 22nd Battalion. Thomas Pearce Bennett was born in Stawell, and he was ordained into the ministry in 1902. He served at Dunkeld, Hamilton, Learmonth, then a stint in Ballarat at St Peter's, during which time he and his wife Clara lost a baby girl. And then he went to Warrnambool, and from there he enlisted in the AIF. And I'll mention two female writers here. First, Jeannie, or as she wrote under, Aeneas Gunn, the author of We of the Never Never, was Clara's sister. The second one to mention is Patsy Adams Smith. She so admired this man that she devoted a chapter of the Anzacs to him, and it was titled TP the Padre. So it is she, rather than me, that provides these glimpses and quotes and legacy. This man was different from others of his kind, she wrote. You can sense it in his letters, his diaries, and his photographs that show him weary, thinner, concerned for his flock. Captain Bennett travelled on the Ulysses in May 1915. He was documenting the experience with his ever-present camera. He also packed a small portable organ, so he was known to conduct sing-songs on the deck. Sports and entertainments were his domain as well, and he organised blindfold boxing, the mind boggles, and this game, spar and bolster being a type of pillow. That's one of his photos. The author had seen a photo of Clara, a pretty, round, merry-faced girl with a strand of hair escaping and tumbling round her laughing face. On board the ship one day, he wrote in his diary, "Get this note away to my darling girl. She's a brick to give me the opportunity of this magnificent experience." I'm not sure whether he thought it was a magnificent experience all the way through. He took some time to adjust to the sights and sounds of Egypt, and particularly to the language and the behaviour of some of the troops, but he seems not to have been judgmental. In his diary he wrote, "First morning on the peninsula, went to the trenches and understood what Australia did, the impossible." This isn't one of his photos. I think this is a war memorial photo. His parish becomes wherever the boys of the 22nd Battalion are crouched. He lives in a dugout in Shrapnel Gully, under the same difficult conditions, experiencing the same meagre food, the illnesses, the close calls, the weight loss, and the sorrow. And he does write one evening, "Dear God, what is to become of us?" He runs confirmation classes, conducts services and burials. He engages in much correspondence. He writes letters of condolences to bereaved families. He answers letters from families who are searching for answers. And he censors hundreds of letters each week. And he wrote, "Late at night, 2 candle stumps." His photo collection grows. His diary mentions sunset, mules, water carriers, lonely crosses, makes one sad, and adds, "Flies very tame indeed." And that's one of his photos. Anyone who's been to Gallipoli, and there's quite a few of us here, will understand when he says sunset's indescribable. But by November the 28th, things aren't great. He wrote, "Snowed all night, went for services, impossible to hold them, 12 to 18 inches of snow everywhere, too dark to read or write in the tent after 2 p.m. It was these conditions, and as he recorded, many men under his care needed boots, and they were under the heaviest bombardment to date. I think that caused him to write, "What is in store for us?" By mid-December, the gradual evacuation had begun, and Thomas finds himself on nearby Lemnos. He ate tea of pineapple and sardines with a pocket knife. The tents were crowded, it was cold and it was wet, but he wrote, "Wash all over, slept in pyjamas." December the 24th, he wrote in his diary, "Went round tents, saw every man, Christmas Billies being opened, fun. He wrote my billy contained a pipe, 2 tins of tobacco, peanuts, 10 envelopes, curry powder, laces, 2 chocolates, veal and tongue, pencil, handkerchief, all from Mrs. Cook, Craig's Private Hotel, Ballaarat, and also a pudding from A. Rogers of Koroit. I read this and I picture my 2 grandfathers and my great uncle, who are up there on the screen, opening their billies on Christmas Eve on Lemnos. And I pause to wonder if they ever crossed paths with this special man, particularly the 2 in the 22nd. Early in 1916, Thomas is back in England and thinner, and he requests a return to his parish. The answer comes, "My dear Bennett, 12 months of strain you have had is as much as any parish priest ought to undergo." He travelled home as chaplain on board the canoa, bringing invalids home. His appointment was terminated in March, but of course that was not the last of his connection to war. Back in Western Victoria, he was required to deliver news, unwanted news, to next of kin. He sought out returned soldiers, and he also sought out the families who he had corresponded with, and he worked to establish the Warrnambool RSL. His son donated his diaries, letters of condolences, colorised and black and white photos, and even his Christmas billy, I think, which are preserved in both the War Memorial and at our Victorian State Library. In Christchurch, Warrnambool, a stained glass window is dedicated to him, and in a building just adjacent hangs a unique artefact, a marker flag retrieved by the Padre as he evacuated. And it's interesting because it was restored by the same company who repaired our Eureka flag. I'm not really sure why Ballarat is the burial place for both of them, but possibly as their baby daughter, also named Clara, was already interred here. And sadly, again, on this large plot, neither his wife or his daughter are mentioned. Having gone to school here in Ballarat, I was attracted by the Ballarat High School insignia, although that wasn't my school. I was at the other end of town. And when I looked closer, I saw this was the grave of John Henry Refshogi. Like many stories, this story begins in the 1950s when a 28-year-old Danish man, Peter or Peder Refshogi, emigrated to Victoria. He followed mining pursuits up in Yakandanda, where he met and he married an Irish girl, Eliza. They produced 4 sons, and this man, John Henry, was the oldest. He was born in Yakandanda in 1861. He did all of his schooling in the region and became a pupil teacher, also in the region, just before his 15th birthday. After 25 years of teaching, all the while enhancing his reputation, J.H. Refshogi was appointed from more than 24 applicants as headmaster at the Ballarat Agricultural High School, and the two began their long association in April 1910 up at the brand new Sturt Street site. And there he is in the front in the staff photo taken at the end of the first year. His story is fascinating, and it's thoroughly told in Phil Roberts' wonderful history of the Ballarat High School. Seemingly he was a rather stern figure, but his influence certainly cannot be debated. He overcame many obstacles, among them a fire that destroyed the school. He saw old boys, who of course would have been young men, very young men, and staff leaving for the front, with 43 of them not returning. He experienced disruptions at the school due to the Spanish flu, also measles and scarlet fever. It was recorded in 1921 that the school could hold its own with any in the Commonwealth. The headmaster was congratulated on a wonderful influence in the formation of the character of the children under his care. And the teachers in the room would agree that's not a bad compliment. Phil tells me the artwork done here on the cover is an ex-pupil, Wes Walters, and he was an Archibald Prize winner. In announcing his intention to retire, John Refshogi in 1923 said he'd bought some land in the district and he was intending to work out rather than rust out. But sadly, his retirement was short-lived and he passed away 3 years later. I'm sorry, I think that's, yes, 3 years. This is an interesting snippet. In 2005, the owner of a local second-hand shop spied an old cedar boat at the tip and he arranged to procure it. He went off to get his trailer and while he was away, half of the boat was crushed by a truck. But he decided he'd rescue what was left. As luck would have it, just a couple of days later, ex-Ballaarat High School pupil and local teacher, Ian Martin, came into the store looking for doorknobs. He couldn't believe his eyes when he saw the bow section of the J.H. Refshogi in which his crew, with him in the bow seat, were head of the lake runners-up in 1965. Well, he said to me, he couldn't not purchase it. It sat in his shed for several years while he pondered where to display it in his house, but he eventually concluded that there was a more appropriate home. Headmaster Refshogi had been given £150 in 1910 to build a rowing shed, but he was long gone by the time that the school was fully accepted into the public schools competition, and it was 30 years after his death that the shell, named after him, carried the crew to victory in the head of the lake in 1956, the year that Olympic rowing was also contested on the same water. And there are a couple of people and a coach, I think, in that photograph from the winning crews, two of them in the mid-50s, and they were present as this historic artefact was handed to the Ballaarat High School Boat Club, where it is displayed today. John is buried with his wife Danella. She outlived him by 40 years, living to 98. And sad to say, nobody passing would know that she was in the grave. While researching something of her life, and it was very slim pickings indeed, I was taken down yet another path and I learnt about a remarkable man. This is a little away from Ballarat, but it does have a connection, because I read that in May 1919, Marie, M-O-R-E-E, the only daughter of John Refshogi, was about to sail for England, where she would marry her fiancé, Major Fitzpatrick, MC. They had been contemporary students at Sale and Melbourne University, and their remarkable partnership ended 51 years later in Hamilton. The connection between the two families began in the early 1900s, when each Monday Sam Fitzpatrick and his brother David headed off from Haywood on their bicycles for the 45-kilometre trip to board in Sale and spend the school week at the Agricultural High School. Kids today couldn't imagine that, could they? Sam was very interested in drawing and painting, but his headmaster, yes, Mr. Refshogi, suggested that he might study medicine. And this set off a remarkable career: work at Melbourne and Warrnambool before enlisting in the AIF, being commissioned as a captain, service on Gallipoli and then the Western Front, where he was awarded a Military Cross at Pozières. Then he worked in England at military hospitals and was later sent back to France to work attending prisoners of war. He took the opportunity to learn German while he was there. In Hamilton, Sam developed into an outstanding GP and surgeon. He became a world authority and lecturer on the treatment of hydatid disease, and he learnt Spanish so that he could go to a world conference in Mexico. He was awarded an MBE and a CBE. He still loved painting and drawing, and many of his works, such as this one, hangs in the Hamilton Art Gallery. We usually travel through Hamilton during the summer, and I'm looking forward to sitting in the Samuel Fitzpatrick Gardens as we travel through Hamilton. I'd suggest if you're interested and you've got some time up your sleeve, type the name Refshogi into a search engine. This family dynasty, through several generations, spreads into fields such as medicine, politics, education and law, with many rising to the highest levels. An outstanding legacy for a man who decided to come to this country from Denmark. And I'd like you to meet my last man. When I walked past this memorial, I saw a word that was foreign to me, a German word, and I hope I get close to it, Liedertafel. Well, I had to follow that one up. But I also saw his epitaph, which read, "His life was gentle and the elements so mixed in him that nature might stand up and say to all the world, 'This was a man.'" I had to look that up, but that's Mark Antony's words following the death of Brutus from Shakespeare's Julius Caesar. The headline, "Another pioneer gone, an extremely versatile man." Mr. John Robson was described as one of Ballaarat's oldest, best known and respected citizens. He was a musician and an elocutionist. 14 members of the Robson family from Newcastle in the UK arrived in Victoria in 1854, enticed, of course, by the glowing reports of gold discoveries. John was a teenager and he apparently entertained passengers on the piccolo. Father Matthew was a carpenter, and he was doubtful that tools or timber would be available when he got here. So he created what we'd call today a flat pack home, a portable wooden residence that could be erected when he got here, and it arrived on the ship with them. In Ballarat, John was a miner for a while, a carpenter, a teacher at St Paul's Day School, and then he became involved in banking, a wise man, and he was involved in that until his retirement. The young John was an accomplished oarsman, a boxer, a billiard player, and his involvements in life later stretched to, of course, the Mechanics' Institute, the Old Colonists, the Art Gallery, the School of Mines, Church of England, especially St Paul's, the Masonic Order, and he was also a Justice of the Peace. But it was in the musical circles and the speech circles that his legacy was created as a practitioner on many instruments, a conductor, a teacher, an adjudicator, mostly at South Street. And I know that the late Les Holloway wrote a chapter on John Robson in his book on the history of South Street. He was a conspicuous figure leading the massed bands at the annual band competition. He was a lover of opera and Shakespeare, making, of course, his epitaph quite apt. It's reported that he once recited Macbeth to an audience without a book or a manuscript, and he gave each character his or her own individual portrayal. But the Liedertafel, we could all do that, couldn't we? The Liedertafel. This concept was brought to Australia by early German immigrants, and it's a society of men who combine the enjoyment of singing with social interaction. And my search took me to our Gold Museum, where this magnificent frame is on display. I took these photos last year just on my phone, always intending to go back and get better shots. Little did I know. This was presented to John Robson, their conductor, as a token of esteem from members, committee and patrons. And it has all the members, the patrons around it, and of course John Robson in the centre. The group was certainly energetic. It was reported that they delivered 24 concerts in their first 3 seasons. And over this period, the Mechanics Institute venue became too small for them. So larger audiences were catered for at the Alfred Hall, where Dame Nellie Melba performed at several of their charity concerts, benefiting local organisations such as the Art Gallery and the Benevolent Asylum. Also on the wall at the Art Gallery, as a part of the Withers display, I found a large reproduction of their 40th concert program. John and his brother, both bachelors, I'm glad you showed me where to go back. Both bachelors lived at Rothsay at 1 Eureka Street. This was the venue for John's lessons in vocal and instrumental music as well as elocution. There's a little similarity there, isn't there, with the two brothers? They were constant companions, they shared all the interests, and they were often spotted walking arm in arm, and apparently people referred to them as the Siamese twins. Apparently the health of James, in the frame, Jazz, deteriorated greatly when he lost his companion, outliving him by 5 very difficult years. These were some of the things that were said about John Robson when he died. Down the bottom there, I think it's brilliant conversationalist. John's estate was put in the hands of auctioneers Dopel and Chandler, both of these men being members of the Liedertafel. I think Dopel had a long period of time at the helm of the mechanics as well. The advertisements make fascinating reading. A home with 9 large and lofty rooms, polished and decorated mantels, beautiful extensive grounds laid to lawns, flower and fruit gardens, and of course close to the Victoria Street trams. Household items listed included many instruments, including 2 grand pianos, violins, flutes, clarinets, and the piccolo. I wonder if it's the same one that came on the boat. A Chesterfield sofa, Brussels carpet, massive Italian bedhead, marble statuary by celebrated sculptors, gent's bicycle, a large magic lantern, Encyclopaedia Britannica, a large Newtonia telescope. The list goes on and on, stated as a collection of a connoisseur. I know I certainly would have put a bid on for the walnut dinner wagon. John was a man of means. He was universally admired, however, for dispensing a great deal of charity among the poor of Ballarat East, particularly at Christmas time. This is a large plot with just one name recorded on a single memorial. It's a little sad that this is the burial place of 9 members and 3 generations of the Robson family, including Matthew, who built that portable home, his wife and his 3 sons. I enjoy walking at the cemetery. Some people say it's a place of death. I regard it as a place of lives. And as I walk around, I often say people's names out loud. I read the names out loud. Lucky there's not too many around. And that's because this is one of my son's favourite authors, and he led me to this statement. Do you not know that a man is not dead while his name is still spoken? Thank you very much for listening tonight. I'll make way for you.
Dear. Oh no, I think it's stuck. This is one of the problems with masks, isn't it? They can get stuck in your earrings. Thank you, Marion. That was absolutely fascinating. What a wonderful talk and incredible slides. And who hasn't walked in a cemetery and wondered about those names that you're walking past, filling in the blanks, trying to imagine the histories. Well, Marion's done it for us, and I think that's just a wonderful task. Curious person with a curious mind. I have so many questions for you, Marion, but we don't actually have the facility to ask those questions tonight. Maybe next time we'll get you on to tell us a bit more about some of those characters that you find. And it's interesting, isn't it, because it's a very unique way for us to feel a bit closer, I think, to our town and our history. And it's quite an intimate way for us to feel closer to those people who we would walk past. So thank you for saying their names out loud. And I'm hoping that maybe one day in the future, when we're all gone, somebody's doing it for us too. Although it does make you wonder about what you'd put on your headstone, whether you try to inspire somebody to look you up. Thank you, everyone, tonight. And please, one more round of applause for Marion Snowden. Marion did want me to just mention that there is a project that you might be interested in hearing about and maybe even submitting to. It's called 150 Stories for 150 Years, and Annie de Jong from the cemetery is keen to receive additional stories for that project, which was launched a few years ago in conjunction with the 150th anniversary of the new cemetery. And they want to record something of the lives, achievements and contributions of women memorialised in either cemetery. So this will help very much, Marion, in you sort of building out your lot of stories. Now, it's not just for the prominent women of the community. They're hoping that your contributions will reveal untold stories held by family and friends and shine a light on unsung community members. Marion, for instance, is going to tell of her mother, Dot, who contributed years of service to mothers' clubs and made thousands of toffee apples in her tiny kitchen, raising funds for schools, community and sporting organisations. And I think that sort of story, similar stories like that, will have played out across Ballarat for the last 150 years. So you can submit your stories online at the Ballarat Cemetery's website, and you can also read some of the stories that have already been submitted. So thank you again, Marion Snowden, for your generous talk tonight. Sam McCole, of course, has been our technical wizard. We could not have done it without you, and certainly we're learning a lot about how to do in-person and online events, and a lot of that is down to Sam, and also for Phil Roberts, who is sort of the patron of the Twilight Talks. He's here tonight too. Next week, please join us as Peter Morey brings us a potted postal history of Ballarat and Victoria in the 1850s to the 1950s, looking at some of the earliest general post office dramas in Ballarat, which is fascinating. I'm really looking forward to that. You can book your tickets online at ballaratmi.org.au/Twilight Talks 2020, or just head to the Ballarat Mechanics Institute website. Once again, thank you very much and good night.